Laura Obert.
Introduction.
Oh, Sheriff Moore.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good.
Oh, Pam Jackson,
John Jackson.
Seth Wenzel.
Brandon Harris.
Karen Susag,
Kirk Flynn. Representative Kelly Flynn.
Ed Shendall.
Teresa Munson.
Mike Evans.
Craig Reeds.
Okay, thank you for all coming. I guess whoever wants to start off on this can start. I don't have anything to start off with.
I guess I'll go ahead and start. First of all, John, thank you for coming. Kelly, thank you for coming. Counties across the state, this is not unique to Broadwater County, but there's a lot of these roundtables going on in counties throughout Montana. And one of the reasons for that is that there is a disconnect of communication between the legislators for Montana and counties, county commissioners, county citizens. The number of decisions made at the legislature this year resulted in cut services that county taxpayers now have to cover themselves. Unfunded mandates passed from the state to the counties at a record rate, to the point where the legislature years ago, in what was called the Big Bill, kept counties from being able to grow at a rate of more than 0.5%. So regardless of what happens in a county, we are limited to that growth. If we want to grow beyond that, if we want to fund a department at a higher rate than that, we either need to take money from another department, we have to have new growth in the county, because that's not limited to the 0.5%, or we have to cut services. We simply don't have any other source of money. Or the third thing is the citizens have to say, yeah, we want to pay more taxes to have a stronger education system. So this year, that remained the same, but what happened is the legislature, in a number of bills, passed on costs, responsibilities to counties. A big one is our detention centers. Department of Corrections has a mandate to save money in detention costs. Well, those were shifted to counties. District courts used to pay much of the cost for trials. Well, expert witnesses were shifted in full to counties. There was a threat when county attorneys opposed a particular bill that if they didn't get in line, that the state would no longer fund 50% of their salary, as is done now. They're based off the judge, which is how counties are able to afford the high rate of pay that county attorneys get. So there were a number of those types of issues. So we commissioners got together at a meeting about 3 months ago and talked about what can we do to increase the knowledge base that legislators have. Many are coming from private sector jobs, ranches and farms, and have never had any experience in local government or state government before becoming lawmakers for the state. So our discussion was, how can we help legislators to understand how their decisions affect us, property taxpayers at the county level? So that's what this is about. This is about getting some questions answered, but it's also about how can we work with our candidates for House District 70. Our senator has 2 more years with us. I'm sorry he's not here. Several bills that did pass unfunded mandates to the counties, our representative voted against. So how do we communicate with our candidates and our new legislators to help them understand how their decisions affect us here where we live? So that's what this is all about. So any questions at this point?
Several.
Okay, good.
Could you provide a list of all the bills with the unfunded mandates to us?
I don't know that I have the bill numbers. I do have an analysis that was done that included much of the cuts, the proposed cuts, and certainly I can get you a copy. I think everybody has a copy. I don't know that I think I sent one in an email to you, but maybe not.
I had seen none on the exact bills. I would prefer you send the exact bills.
I don't know that I have those, Kelly, but you will probably know them when you look at I can get you a copy right now if you want, of what we have. I think it's 15 to 18 page analysis. Do you have an extra? Perfect. And that should help. Now, these are the proposed cuts, but
Okay.
DOC
the
is
question I would
a
ask you
huge one.
Is, are these the proposed cuts in the cuts that are given by the governor, that are proposed in the upcoming session? Or are
Both.
these from the previous session?
Well, from the general session, so the one we just finished in April.
So the cuts you're talking about, they're not the ones that the governor is outlining in the 10%, or it's not 10%, but the ones that are proposed in the special session?
It's both, Kelly. What it is especially DOC, that's the biggest one we're grappling with. There were several bills passed that allowed costs to shift that used to be covered by the state that were shifted to counties. And a glaring one is when a person was incarcerated previously and went to the state, they were found guilty, they became a ward of the state. When they were let out on parole and re-offended, they continued as a ward of the state until new legislation came in that said, no, if they're out on parole and they re-offend, they're gonna go back to being a county responsibility. Then county taxpayers now are paying for that person to sit in county jail on the county dime, waiting for the court process to go through, and then waiting the 123 days average to get sentenced. All that on the counties, whereas that used to be a state responsibility financially. So that's probably the biggest one that's hitting counties across the state. It's been compounded with some of the cuts from the governor. So it's a combination of the two. Decisions by the legislature made last session and decisions of the governor coming up with the special session and his proposals at this point.
And are the cuts you're talking about, I see in the Department of Corrections that those cuts now have been reduced under his proposal down to, I believe, 1.4%. So is that part of what you have figured in here then? Because that one was cut down to a very small amount.
It's
rather
still,
than some of the others.
it's still an effect, it's still an unfunded mandate from the state to the counties that there may be some reductions in the overall cuts or proposed cuts to corrections, but this is not one that has been reversed and is still a burden on the county taxpayers. That reduction would be for other services, not necessarily for this issue.
If I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Kelly, one of the things, frustrating things, not only for me, but also for the sheriffs around the state, is a lot with the Department of Corrections. We've met with Reg Michaels, who's the new director, and he's a great guy, he's got great ideas, but he's under the gun. That capping that inmate population of how many state inmates can be in the facilities around the state. When that was passed in legislation, there was 572 state inmates within the walls of county detention centers around the state. He got capped at 250. So what happened is DOC said, fine, we'll let them out. And so they did. And so instead of having them incarcerated, they let them out, they go and re-offend, and then they come back on local charges, so then it's on the local dime. And that's where the frustration part is, because I understand where some of the sheriffs, Gallatin County, Cascade County, Missoula County, Yellowstone County, they want to do the actual cost versus the daily jail rate of $69 that DOC set forth and legislation passed. I understand that we're at $65.93, so it doesn't really bother me 2 cents. But what happens is with all the things that have happened with DOC and the restrictions that have been put forth, is now if you're a probationer or a conditional release inmate, you can use meth, you can use cocaine, you can drink. And guess what? Your PO is not gonna do anything to you. And then what happens is you become a major burden, and then we end up putting you in jail because you commit another crime. And now you're back in our system, which fills up our court system, it fills up our jails. And then our jails are over full, so then we have to go, okay, who do we let out? So, I'm talking to Lorraine Wadnick, she's talking about public safety, and that's the #1 objective of DOC back in June, and I had to giggle because it's not. If you're talking about public safety and you want safe communities, and I think everybody in Montana wants a safe community, why are we letting felons out of jail? Why is it a felon can spend less time in jail than somebody on a third offense DUI? We have a mandated 30-day jail sentence for a third offense DUI, but I've got felons that have committed sexual assault or sexual intercourse without consent have served 1 day in jail for that particular crime. And I know legislation in their sentencing review committee had changed a lot of their mandatory minimums for those sex crimes, but we've reduced the amount of what it is. So on other offenses, so I understand there's 16,000 some odd people on the Department of Corrections list between the probation, parole, and incarcerated, but the number keeps going up because there's no penalties. And if we keep kicking them out of jail and slapping them on the hand, how are we ever going to get in front of this? And so I understand the fiscal note component for the state side, but it's killing us on the local side. And I mean, we went just here 2 weeks ago, I had 12 inmates of our own inmates on felony charges in our county. That hasn't happened since '05, I think. So when we have those kind of numbers, and they're probation, people already who have been on probation parole, already on a felony conviction, they're reoffending. And so it's that whole, I guess that's where I don't understand my frustration. Part of this is that, is Montana looking at trying to be a safe place where people want to come and bring their businesses? Is this where we want to have safe homes, safe communities, or are we just worried about the other stuff that we can't control? Because, like I tell commissioners all the time, if we don't have a safe community, a safe state, no one's going to come here and spend their money in the first place. So that's my frustration in a nutshell.
So the question is, I guess, we said that it was 572 and is capped at the 250. So that other 222 are distributed someplace around the state, is that right?
No, a lot of them got out. The amount of people I have a sex offender that spent 9 months in jail. His sentence was that he had to complete sex offender treatment 1 and 2 prior to his release. When that got capped, they kicked him out. He's back living in our community. And this is a guy who's 23, 24 years old having sex with 15-year-old girls. The kind of guy I want back. I sent him away for a reason. And so they're just dumping people that they are deeming as not a threat to society and kicking them back. And so I understand Reg, where, I had a long discussion with Reg Michaels down in Miles City at an MSPOA meeting. He's got a threshold of, you get to 250, you're gonna lose $1 million. And I guess that's where, now we're tightening the noose on somebody who's trying to do the right thing with public safety, trying to keep inmates accountable, but now we're tightening the ropes so much. And I guess that's where my complaint is all the time. In public safety, we can't control other people's bad behavior. It's not like the Department of Health where, we might have too many people working in somebody's opinion, but inmates, that's based upon their own individual behavior on whether or not they're committing a felony. So, I guess trying to strong arm, and I guess that's how I see it, strong arm the DOC into getting these areas in a lower level, you're forcing them to put people that are convicted felons back in the community at a much higher rate to keep their budget whole and keep the people that they have in place. So you know, I don't, it's just a frustrating
I
thing.
guess, could I ask a question with that though, fiscally, like for our county, and I do recall that bill, I believe it is a bill I voted against. In our county, what is the fiscal cost in our county?
For-
For us having to house more of these folks?
Well, we spend about $821,000 a year running that jail. And we house for all sorts of folks. I mean, for us, unfortunately, and this is outside of my control and anybody sitting in this room, when that jail was proposed back in 2003, it was proposed by Sheriff Thompson and Under Sheriff Knapp, and they said that that jail will take care of itself and will fund itself and it won't be a burden on the taxpayers. And so unfortunately, I've had to continue to live that nightmare since I've been sheriff and when I was under sheriff. But we have to bring in, we have to keep it full all the time and try to generate at least $1 million to keep the doors open, to pay for our inmates and everything else. Because in reality, the community should hold some responsibility. The county should hold some responsibility tax-wise to house and incarcerate their own individuals versus trying to house for Marr County, Wheatland County, Golden Valley County, Muscle Shell, Sheridan, Yellowstone, Kalispell, Helena. We're pulling from all over the state, trying to raise revenue to pay for our own inmates as well. So that's our own local nightmare, not necessarily one at the state level, but we have, what do we have right now?
46 today. We had 57 last week.
Yeah. And
46 beds.
we have, what, 36, 37 that are DOC?
We have I think 40 or 41 right now,
Oh.
DOC.
Hey, Win,
So,
can I ask you a question just for clarity?
Yep.
How many of those 12 that are ours are out on revocation or pre-sentencing?
well, I don't know how many we have right now. We've had a few jump out, so.
Actually, on last Friday, there's, in district court, there's a lot of them got out of jail, so I think we're down to about 5. We'd have to go back and look at who they are, but I would say the odds are probably most of them are all on revocation or at least more than half, I would say. Oh.
So
Or
more than
prior
half,
criminal
Kelly,
histories.
would have been state-funded, not county taxpayer-funded prior to these bills. So that gives you a little bit, when you look at 5 to 12, at least half, if not most, gives you a little bit ability to kind of put some dollars to that, if you look at those numbers and just do the math, if that helps.
And I think like per year for housing our own inmates, if you go off the $65.93 that we charge DOC, you're probably anywhere from $150,000 to $192,000 of what it would cost us our own money to house those, roughly 8 to 12 inmates a month per day of our own. So
No. Thanks.
I think, to piggyback a little bit off what the sheriff has said is that, if you go out and you talk to the Department of Corrections and these probation officers, they are being told to don't do house visits. Don't go out and arrest these people, and then they're committing these crimes and then we're arresting them or dealing with them while they're intoxicated and things like that, and it is getting frustrating. It's burdening our patrol officers. So I think you don't want to look at it just as the jail costs. You got to look at what it's doing to your caseloads for your patrol division, your detective, and things like that. For all these people that are reoffending and more cases, more felonies every year, it seems like we're going up, and it's same faces. So.
Well, I think when Kevin Olson came and visited with us in June, they were projecting, I think, 11,700 new felony cases in court across the state of Montana. 8,000 of those average go back on probation. We keep throwing people in there, and there's got to be a give point in my opinion. there has to be a consequence for a person's actions, because there's no other way to get them to stop their bad behavior. A prime example, and I'm not gonna pick on Kirk here, but if he allows somebody to do weekends to do their jail time, what's the consequence? I get to pick my time that I wanna go to jail. I get to do it when it's convenient for me. There's no loss for me, there's no punishment for me. Versus, you're gonna go to jail for 10 days, starting right now. I might lose my job. Should have thought that before you made your bad decision. It might inconvenience me. Should have thought about that before you made your bad decision. No different when you're in high school and you got in-school suspension. It wasn't when you got to choose when you wanted to go to in-school suspension, you just went. And if it cost you something like getting to start the football game or the basketball game, you should have thought about it before you made your bad decision. And I think that's where our justice system is seriously wrong, is that we're allowing the defendant or the subject to dictate what their punishment will and when it will be. So we've created our own nightmare with this. And so something's got to give and something's got to change. And I don't know exactly how we do it. I don't know how we have conversations about it. You know, the Sentence Review Committee and their thought process and some of their stuff, you know, that's a different nightmare. You know, I guess if I'm going to get on my tangent about the state kind of pushing the envelope back on the counties, local jurisdictions for picking up their slack, I'd probably jump on my bandwagon on the highway patrol. You know, we used to be a 3-person station. When I got here in Broadwater County in 2000, we had 3 state troopers here. Now we have 1. You know, now we went from when Marvin Reddick was on the executive protection group or whatever they are, there was 4. Now there's 7 protecting the governor. Now we send troopers to every football game and basketball game and things like that. Now the state police, or not state police, and heaven forbid they ever get there, but the state highway patrol is doing everything other than their basic statutory requirements. They don't do traffic enforcement, they don't do crash investigations. We're picking up that slack for them. You know, I don't know what the discussion was for their criminal interdiction team, which started out as drugs and now we're doing human trafficking. But that kind of falls away from their basic requirements set forth in statute of doing their traffic enforcement and crash investigation. So they're off doing whatever they're doing, and I think it's just to generate revenue through equitable sharing in federal cases for drug smuggling and human trafficking cases, to bring towards back to the Department of Justice is what I think it is. But I can't seem to get a straight answer from the Attorney General or from the Highway Patrol Colonel in the meetings I've had with them, but I'm pretty sure that's where that started at. And so, you know, that burden of highway safety is now falling upon the sheriff's office. You know, Fish and Game came and said, hey, we need some more money. And so legislation said, okay, we're going to use this money, but now you're going to do 14 hours of biology a week versus law enforcement as a warden. So now that burden has come over to the sheriff's office as well. And since our illustrious biologist on elk has told everybody in the state of Montana and the United States to come to Broadwater County to shoot your elk, my patrol deputies are doing trespass on property for elk hunters like crazy every single day. So every time we start shortchanging those state agencies, and I can understand the over budgetary ideas, but all that comes back to the local sheriff. And, you know, even though there's a trespass issue, and I don't know if you've had any this year or not, Kelly, but I know there's been plenty of them. Every time, that's one of my guys out there doing somebody else's job. And that takes away from their job. Their job is to do criminal investigations and public safety in and for the people of Broadwater County. And the hunting violations are supposed to fall under the Department of Fish and Wildlife and Parks. So it's just another thing that keeps coming down the pipestone as, let's just put it back on local jurisdictions. And it's not just my frustration. I can tell you that there's a lot of sheriffs in the state of Montana, probably all 56 of them, that share the same frustrations that I do, because I sit with them all the time. So, you know, I guess where does it stop? Where do we put the end to the, let's just keep putting it back on the counties to take care of it. Because my revenue's not going up. When you guys cut funding for those state programs and start pulling people away, like 2 highway patrol positions, that money doesn't come to me, so I can fill in the slack. So, you know, last year, I think the last 2 years, we responded to 269 crashes in our county, and we call for a highway patrolman, and they're like, well, it'll be an hour to an hour and a half before they get there. So I'm just supposed to sit here on the side of the highway, waiting for a highway patrolman. And I talked to the colonel, and I said, it's amazing I can get from Helena to Bozeman in an hour, but it takes an hour to an hour and a half for one of your troopers to come from Helena or come to Bozeman. We're in the middle of it. And so we've gotten off the beat of what they're supposed to be doing and their basic duties, and it's becoming quite a burden on my uncles, so.
A question.
You bet.
At the last session, we had passed a series of somewhat bipartisan reform. In your view, that package of bipartisan reform, did that help or hurt?
I think it hurt. And in the aspect of, is some of the things, and one of them we see all the time now, is this disorderly conduct statute, or the reform of the disorderly conduct. Now they don't want you to arrest if it's their first offense. And we just dealt with this earlier Monday. The county attorney's upset because we put somebody in jail on a first offense disorderly conduct. Well, after 6 times of dealing with the knucklehead, he wouldn't go home, he wouldn't quit drinking, and he wouldn't quit being a problem. The guys took him to jail. He kept giving him a break, He'd say, yeah, I'm on my way, turn around and go somewhere else, and became a problem. And, the driving suspended is not a big deal, but, I think when you look at, here a couple years ago, I looked at statistically across the nation, 75% of the people that were involved in motor vehicle crashes were either suspended, revoked, or never had a driver's license in the first place, and were given 2 days in jail for the 16th offense of driving suspended. So, to me, they're part of the problem, and more crashes that occur in our county and on our roadways affect the local taxpayers' insurance premiums. So if we wonder why more people don't have insurance, it's because we have a high crash rate, and so people can't afford the premiums on their insurance. So all we're doing is cutting off our nose to spite our face. If we could reduce the amount of traffic crashes and actually hold people accountable for driving without a license and driving while suspended, maybe we wouldn't have as many crashes, we wouldn't have so many issues, and maybe our premiums would go down, But when you look at the cost of these fatals, we've had 6 fatal car crashes in Broadwater County this year. One of them is alcohol involved. So, back in, I think, 2007, 2008, the average cost of a one-person fatal alcohol-involved crash in Montana was $1.2 million. Well, that little fire truck crash that was set up on the other end, one side of the family payout on that was a little over $18 million. Who's paying for that? The insurance companies get their money back. Who's paying it for it? The local taxpayers. And like I tell everybody, when you wonder why your insurance is high in Broadwater County, just remember when you call for that quote and they say, what's your zip code? And you tell them 59644, they go, oh, thank you. Ching, I'm gonna buy a new boat now. Because we're gonna have inflated premiums because of our highway is so damn dangerous. It really is. We've piecemealed a passing zone to passing zone, and all it does is cause bottlenecks and crashes. Normal people don't see that. Legislation doesn't see that. And I'm not picking on anybody. It's out of sight, out of mind. If you're not there at the time, you're not gonna know it even happened. How many people know that last Thursday we had 4 semis roll over? How many people know that Saturday we had a horrific fatal crash down there by Warren Flynn's place? If you don't know, if you're not there, you probably didn't know about it. But it's those time-consuming things. So
There's 2 other areas too that were hit by those reforms. One is victim advocates. Those are in jeopardy of state funding now. If that falls on the county taxpayers, of course we have to have that position, but what do we let go in order to support what has been funded by the state, by grants that go through the Montana Board of Crime Control for decades now? So that's in jeopardy. The other thing is juvenile detention. We used to have a cost share again with the state through Board of Crime Control for juvenile detention. The state cut their portion, which was about a 34%, $330,000 cut that was put entirely on local taxpayers. Now that is, again, a compound, that was done in the session, but now the governor's cuts are looking at more cuts in juvenile detention assistance for local governments. So that's another 2 areas that we're looking at losing funding for essential services.
I got a question back to Wynn again yourself. You know, that was a bipartisan package, supported pretty much by most of the law enforcement. Would you suggest then that the legislature would take a look and repeal some of that reform?
Well,
I guess, because if it isn't working, then I guess that's one of the options the legislature would have, is a product that apparently had pretty good support that people have found doesn't work. So I guess what I'm asking you is that what most law enforcement, local law enforcement would say now?
I would get, and I guess this is where, and Brandon can attest to this, is one of my frustrations, is majority, when legislation's in session, the majority of the sheriffs that you see and hear from, I can almost pick every one of them. Sheriff Gookin out of Gallatin County, Sheriff Curry out of Flathead County, Sheriff Dutton out of Lewis and Clark County, Sheriff Linders out of Yellowstone County. There's 7 metropolitan counties in the state of Montana that represent sheriffs at legislation on a regular and consistent basis. The other problem is there's 48 other counties that have a population of probably 15,000 or less that aren't being represented. So when, I don't know what the chiefs do, I don't know what MPPA does for legislative discussions, but when that's a very large demographic. And for, you know, you look at Helena, if you look at Lewis and Clark County, you have Lewis and Clark County Sheriff's Office, and I think they've got, 58 sworn patrol deputies. They've got the Helena PD, it's got 60 sworn patrol officers. They got 28 patrolmen in there, they got FBI, ATF, DCI. They've got a plethora of law enforcement personnel within the county. So what works for them probably works for them. The way legislation set things probably works for them. They don't take people to jail for disorderly conduct in Lewis and Clark County. They don't take people to jail for driving suspended in Lewis and Clark County, nor in Gallatin, nor in Yellowstone. So when you look at those things, those aren't problematic areas for those folks. But the other 48 counties that represent a smaller populace than those other 7, they don't really have a voice. They don't really have part of the discussion. So when you have 7 sheriffs, and they're all friends of mine, but they would represent different issues. We represent different things, because the fact is as a sheriff, I can tell you right now, Sheriff Dutton, Sheriff Duke, and Sheriff Linders, and Sheriff Curry, they're not out arresting people. I still have to go out and arrest people. I still have to take calls. Those guys don't. So when you look at how they represent their office, it's different. And I think if legislation, I think that legislation should say, hey, you know, we want to hear from folks like Scott Hamilton, the sheriff out of Park County, or Sheriff Tronsrud out of Sweetgrass County, or even Sheriff Klusner out of Beaverhead County. Let's look at these smaller jurisdictions and see how these things impact. Let's get their input. Because the fact is we can't, those 7 major areas cannot control and shouldn't control how the rest of the world does business, in my opinion. Because I don't think it's a right perspective. Because Bob Pallas over in Golden Valley County, he's a 3-man agency with he's got quite a large, vast area. So things that happen over there that become law, he's like, what do I do? Because now my hands are tied. I have a problematic person who's 40 miles away from home, and I have to do something with it.
A question for the commissioners tied into that. The AMACO, of course, is a strong lobby at the legislature. Two lobbyists there. I guess my question to the commissioners would be this. With all of those small counties, wouldn't they be weighing in to MACO? And wouldn't MACO be weighing in, advocating for the small counties? And if they did, why did that pass in such a bipartisan view with, I believe, support from MACO?
MACO did and does lobby on our behalf collectively, all counties, big and small. So yeah, and I'm sure you've talked to several of the folks. Not only that, but commissioners show up at the Capitol on a consistent basis to testify for or against particular bills. Our testimony, our lobbyists don't get to direct the legislators. They make their decisions, as you well know, based on their information, not based on what MACO wants them to do. So, yeah, on some issues, they are pro, on some they are con, but you guys make your decisions not based on what MACO tells you to do or what a commissioner tells you to do, but what you're going to do. So, yeah, MACO came in and testified against and for some aspects of the reform. To say that the entire reform was broken or is broken, I think it's a little bit simplistic. There's parts of it that are harmful to local taxpayers because they just unfund mandates that they push down to the county level. That's one of the things that we have to deal with, and we have to communicate to you guys to please be aware of how your decisions affect us. But, yeah, we'll continue to advocate, and so will MACO.
Well, it just sounds like perhaps the small counties, like our county, and it sounds like most of them, were outvoted by a few. And I don't know how the voting goes in MACO. Does each county have a vote, or do all those big counties have more votes, and thus they could swing the viewpoint of what a lot of the local sheriff's departments are feeling in Montana? It sounds like we have a handful that essentially made the decision and outvoted a few, or the greater amount of counties.
Counties didn't make any of the legislative decisions. That was on legislators. So the way that MACO works is every county gets one vote. We have partners like the district court, like MSPOA, the Montana Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, County Attorneys Association. We work with all those different associations. But MACO is not going to pick and choose what counties they support. Every county gets one vote. And then our lobbyists have charges to go ahead and testify for or against different bills. But they don't make any decisions at the legislature. Legislators do.
Well, I understand that, but it sure sounds like if one county has a vote, and 48 of them now believe that the reforms, if I'm hearing the sheriff right, were not helpful. It looks to me like if the counties are there, if the MACO is there, they should be representing these folks here rather than just the big people.
I don't think MACO does support just the big counties, Kelly, and I would more than invite you to our next conference so that you can see for yourself how MACO operates. But I think there's a misunderstanding of what MACO is and does, and maybe we can even get together over coffee and get into that with more detail.
Well, and I think part of that is I think that when that sensory review committee, I know we had a representative, Sheriff Witt, out of Toole County, was the sheriff's thing on there, and I had a discussion with her, and she was frustrated because that group of people, everybody was looking at those dynamics differently, and so, you know, everybody between mental health intervention to drug, alcohol counseling, to community services and all this other stuff, and there's lots of components of that, and I think in an aspect, I don't know if there's a county attorney on that particular one or not, but I'll tell you, every county attorney that I ever talked to, they're trying to get the cases off their desk quicker than they can, you know, than they're coming in. And so that's, you know, that's what everybody's looking at. This thing's just we got a whirlwind of what's going on here, and it's taxing for everybody. You know, there's certain things about the reform bill that I'm okay with. There are certain things I think that don't represent the best interests of the smaller communities. And I'm kind of a loud, obnoxious person when it comes to that, because the fact is that I don't share the same views as I do with my friends who are from the bigger counties. Because our problems and the small county problems are a whole lot different than they are in the bigger ones. You know, we all deal with the same crime, we all deal with the same thing, but You know, one of my biggest frustrations is you look at what happens here in Broward County District Court versus what happens in Lewis and Clark County District Court. You know, I spent 3 years working in the jail in Lewis and Clark County, and everybody in that jail had a bond between $15,000 and $150,000 to $200,000. And that was very consistent. So out of 80 inmates that were in that jail, that was their bonds. If I got a $15,000 bond on somebody in Broadwater County, I would fall over. Because usually what happens, they might get one $15,000, $20,000 from Kirk, and by the time the district judge come down here for their 4 hours on a Friday, they're now OR'd. And so that whole thought process is that, oh, in Helena, this same crime is, this person's gonna sit in jail on a $75,000 bond, but when we're gonna go across the county line to Broadwater, a smaller community where people like to leave their doors unlocked, leave their cars unlocked, we're gonna OR them, we're gonna put them back out in the street, and they become a problem again. And so when you look, it's not just from a law enforcement perspective, it's from the judicial system. Is that when they go to, you get judges that go across from county line to county line. I think Judge Hess over in Garfield County was a district judge for 6 counties. You know what, he's too busy, he's too many people to deal with. And so it's easier just to kick him out of jail and move things through the system as quick as he could. And so I think those are the problems we're dealing with, is that we look at, I saw a thing in Yellowstone County, they want like 4 new judges down there. Great, what about the rest of the state that's growing as well? We're worried about the 7 major areas, and I know Yellowstone County's got a ton of problems, but we have a ton of problems. We have in 2015, we were ranked number 5 in the state. If you were gonna be a victim of a violent crime, we were ranked number 5. 16, we went all the way down to 31. That's a problem. And so we're no different than anybody else. It's just we're a smaller component. And then when you take away things such as high patrol positions, gave more than time, we still have this huge problem of crime and traffic and everything else that's going on. And now we're picking up pieces from the state highway patrol, and we're picking up pieces for fishing game. But there's no extra funding coming in. I think that's part of what Laura's saying, is that legislation is saying, okay, we're gonna do this. You know, when I started in Broward County in 2000, you changed from a classic county of 5,000 people. We got close to 5,000, we went to 6, then we went to 10, and now it's to 15. And so we kind of still get stuck in this little pigeonhole. We have 19,000 cars that come through the state, or through Broadwater County every single day. So we might have a stacked population of 6,000, we got 19,000 people that drive through our county. So now we have 25,000 people we have to be responsible for. And so, but that funding source makes it difficult. It makes it hard for us. We've had 16,000 calls for service this year. When I got here, 1,700. Between fire, medical, and law enforcement, we had 1,700 calls for service a year. Now we're at 17,000 this year already. With pretty much kind of the same budgetary options that we've had in the last 4 years, right? So everybody expects more with less, and I guess that's my frustration part when we start taking away these things. It's just I don't think everybody's looking at how these things are going to change. You know, everything needs to go up. Someone's got to give. You know, whether I know the governor wants to raise taxes and temporary taxes and stuff like that. Nobody wants more taxes. I don't want more taxes, but something's got to give, because we can't keep giving the services that we choose and everybody wants without a funding source behind it. So.
Well, it leads to a large question, and beyond law enforcement, because of course everybody does know now, we do have a special session slated on Monday. So, of course, they are talking about what should we do. And so the question comes down philosophically. In the last 6 years, on the general expenditure side in state government, we have increased spending by 32% in 6 years. We've increased general fund revenues by 14% in 6 years. So our growth in government spending on the state level is increasing dramatically over what we are doing in the rest of the economy. So it comes down philosophically, what do the taxpayers want to do? do we increase the state spending? Because we talk about, state spending hasn't increased. It absolutely has, and dramatically more than what we're doing in the private sector. And the private sector is not doing that bad. If you take 14% and divide it by 6, you find that it's actually over the GDP on the national level. But it has not been able to keep up with the spending that we have on the state side. So that question comes into everybody. To continue to have spending at the state level, at the level we have it. There has to either be one of two things. You have to either increase your revenues or you have to cut your expenses. And so that comes down as a question as a legislature. What do folks want those legislators to do over the long haul? And that, of course, the special session involves a lot of that. People say, well, the revenues have gone down. They absolutely have not gone down in Montana. In actuality, our revenues have gone up by 4.5%. However, our spending is going up above that. And it's a lot of different things. Medicaid expansion. When Medicaid expansion was put in, it was projected to have $27.1 million for the biennium. Today, for the next biennium, it's over $90 million. So, where is that gonna come from? Did it help people? Yes, it might have helped people, but it comes down to the state taxpayer. The burden is going to go to the state taxpayer. So, that's the big question, whether it's the Department of Corrections or the Health and Human Services, or any one of the departments. How are we gonna solve that problem when already the amount of money that's going into state government has increased by that amount in the past 6 years versus what the general fund revenue side is?
Laura, may I interrupt here just for a second? Kelly, my name's Craig Beach, by the way, and I am a victim of individuals who go around shooting places, because it was my place. So I am very sympathetic to what Wynn is saying and Under Sheriff Harris on law enforcement and the needs that we need, and so I'm all supportive of that as well. But one of the questions I have, though, is with this upcoming special session, can the special session be used to undo what Laura has been talking about as far as these mandates that have been put in place? Because these mandates that are put in place, according to my understanding, are going to be in place for 2 years, or permanently until the next legislative session, correct? Mm-hmm. And then my next question is this. Have the county commissioners set a timetable, Laura, when you are going to look at what are the actual costs that are going to be transferred to us as taxpayers, so that we all know exactly what are we going to have to pay out of pocket in our taxes to take care of Sheriff Meehan's department, to take care of our health department, to take care of the fire department, or whatever services that we have to pick up the slack for. And I think if people have a better understanding of what those numbers are, you're going to get better feedback. And I think, Representative Flynn, you're going to get better feedback on what to do with a budget when people can see, like in 2 years, Broadwater County, here's what we have to pick up for, whether it's inmates, meals, all the other healthcare services, the fire, everything that we need as a public service that we as citizens demand for our tax dollars. I think then it's going to be easier for people to have better communication because they're all on the same page. I think right now we're all basically taking a dart, throwing it against the wall. If it sticks, it's good. If it falls down, now let's start all over. And I agree with you, Representative Flynn, just throwing money out there doesn't solve everything all the time either. I think we need facts on where these cuts and expenses are, and I think it can help our county if we can get numbers from other counties, Sheriff Meehan and the representatives up here for the commissioners, what are their costs are similar to ours? Are we on the same page? I think that will help us all tremendously, because we can sit and talk all we want about what are costs, what I need. But it comes down to what are the wants, what are the needs? And to have that, you have to have facts. I think that's what we're missing right now. And I know it's gonna take time
Right?
to come, so I'm not asking right now in 24 hours, Laura, you know, but I think somewhere down the road, our commissioners as well as other commissioners should look at putting together some figures so that we have an understanding. Now, I'm also rational to understand that with Representative Flynn having a special session, they may make some adjustments. It could be on some of this funding as well, maybe not. But after that, I would hope that if we have another one of these community forums,
Which we will.
okay, great, and that then we can have some more specific numbers, and you could say, hey, Craig, you know, this is what it would cost you as a taxpayer. And I think then when people, you might have better attendance here, I think people would get more involved when it affects them directly.
I'll answer the first question, then you guys
Yeah,
can
thank
tackle it. The first question was, in a special session, can you undo the mandates? And a special session, the governor puts a sideboard onto what can be included in a special session. That being said, if 76 legislators vote to expand the scope of the special session, then it can go forward and be
Okay.
expanded.
Perfect.
The second part is a aside to your question about cost. My concern is if they're putting the cost on us as the locals, yet the state government is growing at 32% in 6 years, everybody's growing, and the costs are just getting higher. Where does that stop? They shove the burden on us locally, but yet your costs are still going higher statewide. At some point, that cannot work. You have to, you know, as I said, you either have to expand the revenues or you have to find a way to cut costs. Because is it fair that they shove it off on us? No. Yet their costs are still going up, even with everything you see. Remember, those costs went up 32% in 6 years. Yet they're gonna put the cost on us. I would say in the last 3 weeks since the property tax bills came out, and I'll bet every single one of you commissioners have heard it. My property taxes really went up. How many of you commissioners have heard that in the last few weeks?
I can guarantee
Absolutely.
we have heard it in the treasurer's and clerk's
Absolutely.
recorder's office.
So, and it's not like it's a little increase. What we're talking about is a significant increase, and I'll tell you how some of that got through. When we've had reappraisals, every time we've had a reappraisal, those have been adjusted so the costs are actually smoothed out. This time, we put a bill in that we continued to do that. One side of the aisle said, no, we're not gonna do that. And that was a stealth increase on every single one of these people in this room, including me. And it wasn't the 6.7% that they said it was supposed to be, because that's what it was supposed to be. You asked the taxpayers, and it pretty much, most of them are saying it's between 15 and 20%. And of course, it comes back to you, comes back to me, because, you know, we're the one where the buck stops. And you have to be able to explain, well, how could my property tax bill go up so high? And that's part of the local, some of those dollars are local dollars, mill levies, and some of it is basically a tax increase, that's what it is.
And I want to also piggyback on what Kelly said. He's absolutely correct. That property tax increase was imposed by the legislature, not the counties. We do not have the legal authority to increase taxes beyond 0.5% on any given year. Or 0.05, no, 0.5%, 1/2 of 1%, and that's for the big bill. So the legislature was actually able to impose on local property taxpayers to help the budget This increase on property taxes, it's a permissive mill levy, and that's the kind that doesn't have a vote of the people. That is illegal for county commissioners to do, but the legislature's lawmakers are able to impose that. Whether it is a, fighting across the aisle, it still hits you guys, us guys in the pocketbook. And that's one of the things with this special session that county commissioners are working on is don't pass any more unfunded mandates to the counties. The state has their budget they have to balance, and we get that. Counties have been balancing our budgets. We're still getting our jobs done. But if these mandates continue to fall on us, if people continue to open their tax bills and see that the legislature increased by whatever percentage, I don't remember, Kelly, that is hitting our counties hard and keeping us from being able to do our jobs for the people who live here at the ground, here at the local government level. And that's what these meetings across the state are all about, is educating candidates as well as legislators as to how your decisions affect us here at the ground, and sharing the laws that prohibits us and really gives the power to the legislators. And I guess we're asking for your help. And again, Kelly, you voted against some of the worst of the bills, and I appreciate that. Please, in the special session, do what you can to help any more unfunded mandates from piling on.
I'm gonna correct something there. The legislature and the House passed the bill under the Republican majority so that that unfunded mandate on the property taxes would not go forward. It was the other side of the aisle and Governor Bullock, because they wanted to have that extra money. The legislature said, hey, this is gonna pull the wool over the eyes of the taxpayers if we don't do what we have always done. And so now it comes home to roost. This 40 million, and it may be more than that. And I actually talked to Legislative Fiscal Division yesterday. I think it's more than 40 million. People, when they're getting their tax bills, are saying, well, how come it went so high? That is why. It wasn't that the legislature was able to, we tried to do that. We tried to do what we've always done and smoothed out those property taxes. One side of the aisle said no, because they wanted the money for increased spending on the state level side. That's what happened.
And shame on them. Can you share what that House bill or
It
Senate
was
bill
carried
was?
by Greg Hertz. You have to look it up. I don't
Okay.
remember exactly what it is.
Because I
carried
think
by
that's one
Greg
of the
Hertz and
facts
passed
that
on the
Craig's
House side.
asking for that's so important. How did this happen? And where did it come from? So,
What was the increased taxes, what was that for, what was the purpose? Because, as like Sheriff was saying, what we're seeing, and I can only speak for public safety, because it's what we deal in, but we've seen mental health leave our community. There's zero. I mean, it used to be walk-in center, and we had less and less people that were in crisis, and now it feels like every week we're taking them up to St. Pete's and sitting on them for 6 hours, which comes back on us. If you can get the Adult Protective Services to call you back within 2 weeks, you must really know somebody. Child Protective Services, they're pulling out of the community. It's harder and harder for them to get here. And all these state agencies that we work with are they're through my 14 years have just slowly drifted away, yet our taxes are going up, yet it's more on us. And it's like, where's the money going? I mean, really, truthfully, I'd be like, hey, give us a spot that you pay for the 2 highway patrolmen. I'll make 2 traffic guys. Give us a spot for a fish and game officer. We'll have an enforcement officer. At least we know they're gonna be here and stay here. Our one trooper gets called to, she checks on, this was just last week, she goes straight to Livingston, to Bozeman, to Big Sky, to Three Forks, and makes it here to check off shift. I mean, that's how I feel mismanaged and pulling away the state is from these smaller jurisdictions.
It is distressful. When you look at it and you see the state spending going up, and yet the cost on the local level going up for us, it should be distressful. Because you ask yourself, where is it going? And those budgets, they're not something